Hi, my name is Tamana, and today I'll be describing, analysing and evaluating my learning anecdote. The anecdote begins as my class and I were welcomed into our A-level physics lesson by our teacher, Mr. X, to find a setup of apparatus on our desks. We curiously took to our seats and Mr. X began to explain the lesson to us. We'd be learning about Newton's second law of motion. He explained the history behind the law and presented us with the equation to use in our exams in order to answer any questions about the topic. He then asked us if everybody understood the lesson so far and began asking pupils randomly about what he had spoken about. Admittedly, at this point I felt rather overwhelmed by the numbers and letters. The topic just wasn't sinking in. I felt too shy to say anything, and I remember just sitting in my seat and praying Mr. X wouldn't ask me a question. To my relief, he didn't. Mr. X resumed the lesson by demonstrating the experiment using his own set of apparatus, and using his results he utilised the equation he'd presented to us earlier to show us how the law worked. We were then instructed to conduct the experiment in pairs with the person sat next to us, to generate our own set of results to use with the equation. Mr. X would be around the classroom to help if necessary. Once we had finished our experiments, we put away the apparatus and took to our seats again to discuss what we had seen in our findings. Mr. X asked us questions again. This time he asked me a question. After conducting the experiment, though, and seeing my own set of results support Newton's second law of motion, I understood the topic much better and was able to answer my question with confidence. I left feeling positive about what I just learned. In the first half of the lesson, we can see Mr. X took a behaviourist approach to learning. We came into the lesson and listened to Mr. X as he taught the topic. When he had finished talking, he asked us questions which we would have got correct or incorrect. Behaviourists assess the degree of learning through measurable observations, for example, correct answers to questions and examination performance. Skinner introduced the concept of positive and negative reinforcement. In this case, positive reinforcement can be seen through the verbal praise and happiness when we answered a question correctly. Negative reinforcement is found when answering a question wrong and receiving feedback which would help remember it for the next time. Behaviourists see learners as a black box. It doesn't really matter what's inside so long as the stimulus, the information from the teacher, is inputted and we receive an output response. Right answers from the students in this case. Benefits of behaviorism is it gives precise and specific learning outcomes. It's efficient in promoting rapid learning and is useful when trying to memorize facts and formula. Limitations, though, are it doesn't take into account that learners learn differently and at different levels and stages. Emotions, background, prior learning isn't acknowledged either, and it's seen as quite an animalistic way of learning. In the second half of the lesson, we can see Mr. X took a more constructivist approach to learning. Constructivists suggest that learners actively construct their own knowledge and understanding by reflecting and building on prior experiences. So we took what we had learnt from Mr. X's lesson and used it to conduct our own experiment to help us understand Newton's second law of motion. Piaget and Vygotsky developed constructivist learning theory. Vygotsky supported the idea of social constructivism, where you work together in groups for learning, and Piaget supported the idea of cognitive constructivism, where you discover things on your own and learn from it. We can see Vygotsky's principles demonstrated in this half of the lesson. We see Mr. X as the more knowledgeable other who has a better understanding of the topic and has higher skills and ability. We can see Mr. X being the scaffolder in the anecdote, where the higher ability person offers guidance and encouragement to the lower ability learner. Benefits of constructivist learning approaches are it requires active involvement rather than passive listening, so it allows a higher retention of the topic. It allows learners to create their own understanding, their own way. It's centered around the learner and the teacher is more of a facilitator. It also encourages collaboration and teamwork. However, limitations are it's time-consuming and requires money to use resources. It also has an unpredictable outcome, unlike behaviorism. For example, I might have not still understood the second law of motion at the end. Gain from this learning experience. Qualification. Qualification provides learners with knowledge, skills, and understanding. Subjectivation helps learners become independent, break free from existing social, cultural, and political roles and traditions. Socialization helps learners to become part of a particular social, cultural, and political tradition. We can see qualification and socialization being presented in my anecdote. Gaining skills and knowledge to help with exam questions is qualification, and working in pairs and discussing our findings at the end of the lesson is socialization. Could anything be changed? Well, we saw a behaviorist and constructivist approach to learning, but we didn't really see examples of social-cultural learning or culturally responsive pedagogy. Social-cultural learning acknowledges that learners have different ways of thinking due to their difference in history and culture. It encourages learners to interact, negotiate, and collaborate to find answers between them, and it acknowledges that other people are important in the process of our learning. Culturally responsive pedagogy affirms cultural identity, embeds social justice. It encourages critical thinking and encourages learners to voice their opinions. Although both these learning theories are important, they aren't really useful for a physics lesson where there's only one correct answer. We saw qualification and socialization, but not so much subjectification. Again, because we were looking for one correct answer, it wouldn't be that useful in this lesson. Mr. X's use of behaviorism and constructivism in his teaching method helped me gain the best understanding of the topic. Although I didn't fully understand the law in the first half of the lesson, I felt I needed that information in order to help me in the second half of the lesson. After a rocky start, I achieved my learning objectives. Therefore, I think this was an overall good learning experience.